After this, Jesus traveled from one town to another, and one village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with them, those would be the apostles, of course, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 diseases had come out. Okay, so this is just a list of their names. Mary, called Magdalene, here are some of the women. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. So somehow or another, these women were well off enough financially that they could actually support Jesus' ministry through their own means. So Jesus' ministry financially was dependent on the assistance of women, which is very unusual, and would have been considered actually probably quite shameful. And it's probably the reason why Matthew and Mark don't mention that. Luke makes a big point out of showing how Jesus' kingdom inverts all the normal social structures. We mentioned how his approach to the Beatitudes focused specifically less on the poor in spirit and more on just the poor. It's like those who are the social outcasts, the downtrodden, the forgotten, the discarded. Not just those who are poor in spirit and recognize their own humble state before God. That's what Matthew emphasizes, and that's true. But Luke kind of cuts that part out and focuses more on their actual physical state. And Luke does this a lot. He focuses, and again, Paul does this too in his epistles. Paul had this emphasis a lot in his epistles, and clearly that rubbed off on Luke. And Luke focuses on the inverted nature of Jesus' kingdom. And I remember Luke is writing to a Roman official, and he is trying to get this Roman official to agree to clear Paul of his upcoming charges in this trial he's got facing in front of Caesar, and set him free, and by extension declare Christianity in general as a legal religion. I think that's ultimately Luke's goal, to not just to clear Paul, but also to get Christianity itself declared as a legal religion in the Roman Empire. I don't think Luke achieved that, but I believe that was his ultimate goal here in the writing of both Luke and Acts. And so one of the ways he's trying to make the case is by insisting to this Roman official that the kingdom Jesus presides over is not a political kingdom that poses a military or political threat to Rome. Okay? Like, a lot of the people who responded to it were women. You're not threatened by women, are you? No, of course you're not. If anything, you're going to laugh because Jesus' supporters were women. It's like that's something to mock, not something to be afraid of. This is our first time seeing the name Mary Magdalene here in the Gospel of Luke. She is mentioned at the end of Matthew and Mark as one of the women who witnessed the burial and later the first witnesses to the resurrection. She'll be mentioned again in a couple of chapters when we read about Jesus going to their house and her listening to him. And she'll occupy an even more prominent place in the Gospel of John. And as I said before, I believe these Gospels were written chronologically in this order. And so with each new Gospel that gets written, her role kind of becomes a little bit more prominent. I believe there is a reason for that. First of all, I do believe that Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, are the same person. And as I said earlier, I believe she is the woman we met initially without being given her name in Luke 7. I believe that's all the same lady. This used to be actually the standard position of the church for centuries, and lately this has fallen out of favor, but I do tend to think this is the same lady. I don't think a lot of people will say, well, Magdalene refers to an area, a town, Magdala or something like that. But the word Magdalene could also be a version of the word tower. So then that word Mary called Magdalene may not be referring to where she's from. Because, Mary of Bethany is, from Bethany. Okay, so Mary Magdalene, if that term Magdalene refers to a place where she's from, well, not the same lady now, is it? Well, first of all, she could presumably have moved to Magdala and been from there too, as other, that's not impossible. And secondly, the term Magdalene or Magdala or whatever, however it's pronounced in the Greek, may not be referring to a place that she's from, that it may be a variation on the word tower, and it's kind of referring to what she was called in the church at that time, Mary the Tower, or something along those lines. The reason why I think she gets a little bit more prominent in each gospel as each gospel is written is probably because, like with Lazarus in the Gospel of John, she eventually dies. I think she was the sinful woman mentioned in Luke 7. Now, some people will tell you it's not the same person because Mary Magdalene is officially introduced to us in Luke 8. And I think that's true. She is officially introduced to us in Luke 8. But she's referred to here as having 7 demons had come out of her. Now, 7, of course, is the perfect number. I think when it says 7 demons had come out of her, that's not a reference to literal. I mean, there may have been actual 7 demons coming out of her. But I think that, 7 demons, I think what the idea being communicated here is that she was just a perfectly unclean person, okay? She had 7 unclean spirits in her, meaning she was like the perfect sinner. She was a sinful woman. Like whatever her spirits were, whatever her demons were, they had cast her into a role of being a very sinful, perfectly sinful woman, which would match up with the sinful woman of Luke 7. So I think that not identifying her explicitly as that woman, I think is a way to protect her, kind of be respectful of her, while also kind of protecting the church from being associated with a woman who would previously have been a very sinful woman. And of course, we all know that means prostitute. I mean, it wouldn't mean anything else. So I think the idea of obscuring her identity in Luke 7 comes from this desire to protect her from her previous destructive lifestyle, and also to some degree to protect the church is her own reputation, because this lady, I believe, will be the lady who Jesus appears to first at the resurrection, because I think Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany are the same person. I think they're the same Mary. And I think she is also the Mary that we meet, the unnamed woman that we meet in Luke 7, being forgiven of her very sinful life. Like that 7 demons concept to me indicates to me that she was a very sinful woman before the demons were driven out. Now, we don't read about him driving the demons out of her, okay? We don't have an actual account of him doing that. But honestly, to me, that's not really that big of a deal, okay? We don't, for example, have an account of the one-on-one conversation that Jesus had with Peter before he appeared in front of the rest of the apostles. But we have a reference to it in the Gospels and in 1 Corinthians 15. Like one of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances was a one-on-one encounter with Peter that is mentioned a couple times, but never detailed. That's just one of those things where it's like, I don't think we need to have a scene like that to show us that this is in fact the same woman. And I don't know if Luke even wanted to explicitly identify her as the same woman. Because again, I think the idea was to kind of protect her and protect the church from being associated with her very sinful past lifestyle. So that's my thought on that. I believe Mary of Bethany and Mary of Magdalene are the same person. Mary of Bethany being, I guess, where she was from, where her family lived. Mary Magdalene potentially being where she had moved to. Maybe she left Bethany and went to a place called Magdala. Or being a reference to her being a tower, like being a strong pillar in the church. It doesn't necessarily have to refer to a place name. And I think that they are distinguished they seem to be talked about separately in the Gospels. By the time you get to John, it's a little bit fuzzier. Again, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus will all be more prominent in John. And Brandon mentioned the others in Luke and Matthew and Mark. Luke will introduce Martha in a bit. But this family kind of gets more prominent as time goes on. I think it's probably because they were I think the main reason for it, like I said, was to hide their identities, to kind of protect their reputation, and also because Lazarus, as we'll read about in John, was apparently a marked man. And they were probably trying to hide him because he was on the most wanted list too from the Pharisees and the religious authorities. And by the time John is written, he's probably already died again. So there's no longer any reason to continue hiding his identity or his importance. Luke will somewhat obliquely refer to him in a parable. And I think we'll get to that later, but I think there's a reason why I uses the name Lazarus in the parable. So I think Luke kind of acknowledges him in kind of an indirect way, but doesn't explicitly identify him as being anyone important, while John does. And probably because by that point Lazarus has already died again, and Mary also may have already died, or may be so old that it no longer matters. It is also my personal theory that Mary is the woman caught in adultery, the story of which we read about in John 8. I think that's actually the same person too. I'm a little bit less certain of that, but I think it's likely that that's also the same individual. But that we'll cover that when we actually get to John 8. So I'm not going to go into the details of that now.